Hey there, listener. Fritz here. So we're getting back to the John Birch Society, finishing up with part two of Boris's two-part study into the long-running American fascist organization.
The John Birch Society.
In the last episode, we introduced Robert Welch, the Candyman himself, and the whole wealth of paranoid anti-communist conspiracies that they came up with. So we're going to continue it now with their organization, a little more about their ideology, and the return of famous Nazi Revilo P. Oliver. So all right, here we go.
So what is the organizational structure then, and how does Welch envision their activities? What does he outline for their activities to be? So we already established that he is the founder, capital F, and that he has a council, but that everything beyond that should be both clandestine and public. So there's like a clandestine element to it, which is protecting the privacy of the members, not revealing too much information, referring to like different groups in different cities as cells.
Nothing eerie about that.
To him, you have to, in order to fight the vast communist conspiracy, you have to utilize some of their methods as well. This is, of course, why other, mainstream conservatives at the time criticized them for this exact thing.
Oh, for being like too communist?
Well, for rejecting democracy, for example, and for having this kind of secret society element to it. But the first point of Welch in his, what do we do section of the Blue Book is the public part, right? And that is to establish reading rooms that are inspired by Christian Science reading rooms. That would be, as he says, inexpensive, small but inexpensive, throughout the country. They would be staffed by volunteers. Nobody would get paid. They would get, low rent spaces, and use these reading rooms as like rental libraries. And the fact that it's all staffed by volunteers proves like that there are people that are dedicated to the cause, right? That it's not there for profit. The books aren't there to be sold at a profit. But the point is that the communist media in America has started pushing out. Now they're not doing outright censorship of dissenting voices of anti-communists, but they're pushing them to the margins. So the reading rooms would then be a place in which you could access literature that's being censored by the communist media. And this is where he brings up Craiglow or whatever, the War on Christmas guy. He was like, there's this guy, he's a great author. And, they're not, he's being pushed out of all kinds of mainstream publications. It must be the communist conspiracy at work.
I bet the tax exempt status of these reading rooms was a help too. I'm assuming they had it.
I'm actually not sure, but yeah, I'd be willing to bet that you're right.
Yeah.
And the reading rooms did happen. I mean, those were supposed to be, the public face of the organization. And so, you'd put all the good anti-communist literature there. And he goes on to list a bunch of different anti-communist books that should definitely be there, that are super important.
The Bible.
It's actually not even so much. It's it's guys, that were writing in the 1950s about how communism is bad. And I Saw Poland Betrayed by Arthur Bliss Lane, and Russia's Race for Asia by George Creel. These kinds of things.
Classics.
Yes. Now, the second point of, what this group is to do is to publish their own works and to publish as much anti-communist material as possible. He focuses initially here on of course, American Opinion, which already existed, but also that there should be more publications, and that these publications should, quote, avoid eggheadism and be very, straightforward, to the point, none of that, fancy word talking, mumbo jumbo.
Right. None of that word talking.
It's got to be, easy to understand anti-communist material. Because remember, his idea here is that a vast majority of Americans hate communism, right? They just don't understand that everything around them is communism. And
right.
so, if things have to be put to them in a very easy to understand way because they're, being duped, right? And once you reveal that, then they'll understand that everything around them is a conspiracy and la, 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 la. Now, it's worth mentioning here, American Opinion, as I said, published The War on Christmas Guy. This is also where Revilo Oliver did a lot of his writing before he left the society. It was the mouthpiece of the organization, and for all kinds of weird conspiracy ideas. But of course, in the beginning, he also had the support of William F. Buckley and National Review. So in the initial founding text, he also cites that as a thing to put in the reading rooms and to publish. And that's an example of good publication. Of course, Buckley and Welch split pretty dramatically later on, because Buckley also did support the John Birch Society in its early years, but then thought that they were kind of taking it too far with some of their stuff. Especially when the material from the politician was leaked about Eisenhower and everybody else being literal communists.
Well, Buckley was a CIA agent. He probably didn't like when Welch was saying the CIA is also controlled by communists and such.
Yeah, it crosses the line when you fuck with the intelligence agencies.
Yeah.
Fascism is their ideology. Don't forget it.
Yes. But then, of course, he brings up some of the other mediums one can communicate through, which is radio and then television. Now, at this point, he says that television is really hard to break into because it's so controlled by the communists, but the radio is a good option. This, we could see articulated in real life, even today with, the whole phenomenon of American right-wing radio.
Oh, yeah. In Texas, we just called it radio.
Yes. Now, he was saying that, there are already some good people on there and, they're doing some stuff. So, that's where we should look in, and we should try to get as many people as possible in these places, in radio, in television, to promote anti-communist ideas. It's not going to be easy, but it needs to be done. And that, the television is, what the masses are increasingly watching. Again, this is the 50s. So, but that's a future realm for them to
take over.
To take over. Yeah, no, literally. I mean, they what they want to do is do what the communists are doing and infiltrate all these different things. Yeah. It doesn't have to be open. Part of it is public, part of it is open, but get in there and do as much as you can. And again, coming back to their persecution complex, and something that you also see today in right-wing American circles is the whole academic freedom thing, right? The fact that universities are completely controlled by communists now, and there aren't enough right-wing academics. Then he's the right-wing academics he does cite as people that are being marginalized are all insane segregationists, who their voices are being curtailed by the communist conspiracy and the universities and blah blah blah. I mean, this is, again, you could be listening to Glenn Beck or Fox News now. It's the exact same thing, right? Communists on campus.
When Jordan Peterson gave his first tour of the 12 Rules for Life, his first heckler ever stood up and said, "You sound just like the John Birch Society."
Yeah, no, I mean, it's literally absolutely that. So yeah, I mean, they want more anti-communist voices in academia. Okay, but that's a little bit more difficult to achieve. What can the average member do? What is one of their most effective strategies for publicly combating communist infiltration in the government, in business, and in media? Through organize campaigns of letter writing.
That'll do it.
Which they utilize actually to some considerable degree of success. They were able to get tens of thousands of people to write to different companies, complain about some or another congressman. And something, again, I just have to notice because it's pretty funny to me. They have the typical American right-wing obsession with even like large companies bending to the will of communists, and like how you have to, point out when a company's doing something bad in PC. So like he talks about like how
gender neutral potato head dolls, that kind of thing.
Exactly. I mean, in the 1950s, it was that international left wingers had forced United Airlines to start using the UN symbol on its airplanes, and that they desperately needed to petition United Airlines about this. And then to bring this to current day John Birch Society, I was watching one of their videos on their YouTube channel, and it's some guy complaining that he's like, I used to fly with American Airlines, but American Airlines is now like, controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, and they, have like employ like, I don't know, what is it, like diversity officer or something, like that, like so the shit that they're complaining about now, and the shit that like all those right-wing people on like the internet complain about, like various different companies going commie, is something that is in the foundational text of this organization. It's
I remember
complain about like communist infiltration in United Airlines.
I remember the terror of Pol Pot's diversity office.
Right. When they say that, this everything that's happening today is literally the Cultural Revolution, in China. I mean, letter writing campaigns, and complain loudly, get as many people to complain on the media and write letters as possible. Again, this is in their foundational text. This is very important to them.
And of course, as we all know, United Airlines was forced to change its name to Segregated Airlines.
Yes.
To accommodate.
Yes. So number 5 in these points, and I think this one's very important. Like, I'm not reading through all of them because it's...
No, thank you.
Again, he's quite long-winded. We're not taking coffee breaks like the people in this 2-day foundational conference. I don't have a secretary like brewing some coffee and back. And
we should totally get that, though.
This one is interesting, and I'd like to read part of it and see what you guys think.
All right.
We should organize fronts, little fronts, big fronts, temporary fronts, permanent fronts, all kinds of fronts.
Some as big as your head.
One of the greatest weaknesses and mistakes of the conservative side has been that almost all of the organizations, real ones or just letterhead outfits, have been put together for general purposes. The communists have been far smarter. They would never think of setting up publicly, for instance, a committee to promote communism. It is too general, yet we have several leagues against communism, and others just as vague in the fronts that they present.
So there are no communist parties? Is that his implication?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are, but I guess most of the organizing they do, according to him, is like around concrete issues, I guess. So they don't appear obviously communist, I guess, is his point. Which is like, I mean, probably something that comes out of his paranoia.
Right, and he goes on to show that, like, bring up some effective examples of this is, the Committee of 1 Million, which is, dedicated to preventing Red China joining the United Nations, which I guess, the United Nations is already communist. Who cares? But
it's strange because they want to leave the UN, but they also don't want China to be there. So it's a bit strange, but okay.
And then, promoting free enterprise organizations and all these different things. Welch had experience, like I said earlier, on being on the school board, and the PTA would factor into this a lot because they believed the Parent-Teacher Association in the U.S. was controlled by communists, and so that the best thing you can do as like a good parent or something is to join the the PTA and promote anti-communism there.
That is straight up what QAnon is doing now. That's exactly like one of the current trends, to join the school boards, though, but or at least attend meetings and make trouble.
But I mean, why is because if the communists control everything from CIA to PTA, like in America, isn't it pretty much over then? Like,
sounds like they won.
Yeah, well, it's not over yet because they haven't been able to take over the rest of the world, right? There's still areas that they haven't controlled yet, and that if they tried, so the thing is, it's controlled by communists, but they haven't successfully yet indoctrinated the American public yet to be completely collectivist in their attitudes, right? The good heart of the American is still individualist. It's still one that, wants to aspire to wealth, wants, believes in free enterprise, and, believes in the strength of the individual and having choices.
Yeah, this is like the classy version of all that shit that came out of like Christian identity and the militia movement and all that they already live in the end times, and now what's left to do is like fight for the survivors. But this is like the high class, like business dude version, I guess, huh?
Yeah, well, because what he's saying is that there's still a chance for America. There's no chance for the rest of the world, and that's why like America is like this bastion of like, again, an independent civilization, because, Europe's already gone down the shitter. Like any kind of social democracy that's emerging in post-war Europe is a clear sign of this. He brings up Scandinavia as like having already fallen to the communists. And so, there's nothing to save there. And if anything can be saved, it can only be saved in the last bastion of freedom. So, I mean, that's why. And that's why it's so urgent that they act now, and that they act in all these ways that might seem, extreme to most people. And, like I mentioned before, he says this specifically. He says, the question technique, when skillfully used in this way, is mean and dirty. But the communists we are after are meaner and dirtier and too slippery for you to put your fingers on them in an ordinary way. No matter how much you look at them and act like how much they look and act like prosperous members of the local Rotary Club.
Okay,
right.
The Rotary Club's communist now too, huh?
Yeah, everything is. So again, they might look like Man U, but they're everywhere, and liberals are actually also communists, because any kind of promotion of any kind of social welfare or state programs or anything like that is literally communism.
These guys really want to pay for their highways.
Yeah, they do, right? Or, I don't know, they probably just reinstitute slavery or something. I think that
seems like that's where it all started for them,
like the liberty of choice or something for them. Is like, we choose not to pay for this. Let's make people build it for us.
Yeah, we choose to own humans.
I mean, if you go back to it, that's what the whole states' rights movement always was,
sure.
right?
Yes.
I mean, even when you talk about that term in the context of the U.S. Civil War, it was all about, property rights, property at that time literally being slaves.
Yes.
Right. And so this is just the logical extension of that. But, again, with this communist conspiracy and communist menace.
Right.
Welch set up a promising template for how this society was going to operate. And what happened? We know that they did reach a peak, right, with around 100,000 members in like the mid 60s. And how did that happen, and why did it decline?
That's very impressive for a mid 60s fascist organization, really. Like there's
tons, because there was always
mostly like 1-2 people.
Yeah, exactly. And they got a lot of people. It was definitely the most mainstream of all these like extreme right-wing groups in the US. But there was always the question, are they actually fascists? And, like I said, in their official statements and videos and the like, they're, good old Americans. They're advocating for Jeffersonian democracy and
property rights.
Jeffersonian republicanism. Sorry, no democracy.
Jeffersonian republicanism.
That's a major mistake there on my part.
Don't want to offend any of the John Birchers out there.
No Birchers, don't crucify me. But of course, I mentioned before that when the excerpts of his book, The Politician, were leaked, the parts that talk about, how everybody in the government is a card-carrying communist, it started to make, them look even less serious and started to get the media involved in a way that, is totally reasonable in that they were kind of making fun of them, right? And Welch didn't really like that. Welch was caught with his pants down because, he said, oh, well, you're reading that out of context. And, I was writing it to my friends. And yes, I don't have actual evidence that Eisenhower is a card-carrying communist. But, I've studied the communist I know, and I've seen the patterns, and it fits the mold, and la, 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 which, again, didn't make him look great. Because his arguments against this sounded equally crazy. To the point that, he started talking about, well, then, who leaked these excerpts from The Politicians? Take a wild guess.
Oh, damn. I wasn't ready for this.
How did the press get a hold of this private document? Who leaked it? If you had to take a wild guess, who would leak something like this?
It wasn't him. Was it him?
Fritz, the communists. That's right. And not only did communist agents leak it, but the fact that the media was going against him is proof that, in fact, the communist agents are in control of the media, because the story that, say the New York Times or all these other, major media outlets were running with came directly from People's Weekly and thus from Moscow and controlled by the commies. And
all right. Sorry, did you say major media outlets or Magian media outlets?
Well, I guess Magian in this case. Revilo's still around. He would totally agree with that.
Yeah.
He won't be for much longer, but yeah, he's definitely around then. And then, of course, we run into the problem of the military. Now, we've mentioned before that, Stanley Kubrick took some inspiration from Jack D. Ripper off of the John Birch Society.
On no account will a commie ever drink water, and not without good reason.
But specifically, it seems to come from General Edwin A. Walker, who was a decorated war hero in the Second World War and in the Korean War. And like many right-wing U.S. military personnel, he was rather dissatisfied with the outcome of the Korean War, right? He thinks that, the stalemate that happened was, a travesty. The Americans could have won that war if they had, committed their all to it, and that it was, there wasn't the will up in the politicians in Washington and even maybe some people in the military. And that was evidence that, well, the John Birch Society has a point. Maybe they didn't want to win because they are actually communists. Now, Edwin A. Walker is an interesting character.
So the Vietnam was them like, what? Well, we didn't lose good enough. We gotta.
They do have a whole thing about Vietnam too.
Okay, all right,
and we'll get to that in a minute. But Edwin A. Walker was important to this story for a few reasons. One, when it was revealed that he was openly indoctrinating his troops with like John Birch Society material, the government started to take this a little bit more seriously. Why? Because, like I said, there were some dissatisfied elements in the military, and they were looking at what had just recently happened in France with this like attempted coup junta against de Gaulle for his humiliating loss of Algeria. And there were people in the US government that feared that something like that could happen. Like, yes, okay, anti-communism's good, but what if we have a coup? That's not going to look good. Mm-hmm. And so, what was Edwin A. Walker actually doing? So he was, at the time that he was indoctrinating his troops, he was commander of the 24th Infantry Division in Augsburg, West Germany. And he had been stocking the base with John Birch Society and other similar, like, far-right anti-communist materials. Supposedly, this was this pro-blue campaign. Now, what does pro-blue mean? Blue is a color that's come up a couple times, right? We have the blue book, pro-blue. Well, it's not red. And for Birchers, blue is the color of anti-communism, and so thus a pro-blue campaign is an anti-communist campaign.
But the opposite of red is, I think, green, right? But I guess they couldn't do a green book.
Yeah, no. Well, Gaddafi still wasn't around, so
right. Yeah, yeah. They missed their chance.
For the green book.
Yeah,
they could have done a green book, and then Gaddafi would have.
He'd have blue.
To contend with something, but
but that's ecologist, and they're all communists, so it doesn't really work.
Ah, I see.
So the news that Edwin Walker was indoctrinating his troops in Augsburg came from a tabloid newspaper called the Overseas Weekly that was a military publication, right? Or sold on U.S. military bases. And they leaked this information, and it caught a bunch of interest of politicians at home. Specifically, the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee was a guy by the name of Fulbright, from Arkansas, who saw this news and issued a memorandum to President Kennedy, about this potentially subversive element in the U.S. military. Now, this came out and it became public and became a scandal. Walker was admonished by the military. They started formal investigations into the matter, and in 1961, Walker resigns from the army. Although, he was still receiving later a pension and stuff from the army in general. He never actually got formally, court-martialed, I think, or anything like that. So he enters politics in that far-right arena, teaming up with other famous Birchers, segregationist ministers in the South. And he runs for governor of Texas in 1962, where, interestingly, he becomes a target of assassination, which we later find out to be by Lee Harvey Oswald a year later, so 1963. Yeah, exactly. There are a bunch of potential theories about why this is so. I think we don't really have time to get into that right now, but it's kind of a fun fact.
Can you just mention a few of those?
Well,
hot takes. We want hot takes.
Which direction do you want to go in? Oswald didn't like him. According to Oswald's wife, Marina, she said that he thought that he was a fascist, and that he was like a fascist element. Later on, Revilo's theories about Lee Harvey Oswald was that he was a communist who took out Kennedy because Kennedy had stopped being useful to the communists, and then in that theory, Oswald the communist was trying to assassinate Walker.
I see. Okay.
So again, there are a couple different directions. There are a few different directions that this goes in. But he stayed around for a little while, and he continued to run even after this assassination attempt, and even in the aftermath of this Fulbright memo, which had kind of smeared him in the press. And Strom Thurmond, he had the strong support of Strom Thurmond, who we all know,
of course,
the million-year-old racist lunatic senator from South Carolina, who served till he was 102 or something. And
yeah, I think his first job was in the pro-slavery Roman Senate.
Exactly. But again, the Kennedy assassination rolls around. Revilo's writings on the matter prove also to be pretty controversial with the American public, but nevertheless, the organization is still doing relatively well. They are being dragged in the media. They're being clowned. Like we said, Bob Dylan's writing songs. There's a lot of talk about the John Birch Society, and the peak of their popularity comes with their support for Arizona Republican presidential candidate Barry Goldwater. Now, Barry Goldwater, this is again a big story, but Barry Goldwater was kind of representing that farther right element in the Republican Party at the time, and this is around actually when their membership peaks, right? Is during this period of Republican National Convention and the like, which Hunter Thompson again also wrote about being surrounded by Goldwater fans who were jeering and howling and throwing chairs and stuff. They had this really strong right-wing energy for the time. And Goldwater, on his part, refused to denounce the John Birch Society, which, other more mainstream Republicans were asking him to do. And I think also the Klan, he didn't renounce as well. But he went a little bit further, and not only did he, not denounce them, but Goldwater himself said that, of course I'm not going to do that, and many others won't, because, a large amount of people would be embarrassed if the membership list of the John Birch Society actually came out. Meaning that there's a lot more influential people that are members of this group than people really actually know about.
Yeah, he knows where his bread is buttered.
Yeah, absolutely. So, that brings us also to the issue of Vietnam, right? Goldwater, of course, did not win the nomination. And a lot of the kind of momentum that they had gathered around that started to kind of falter a little bit, although they were able to make some inroads in kind of other interesting circles, which is namely their position about the Vietnam War. Now, one would think that if the government was controlled by communists, that Vietnam would be something that they support, right? That they're fighting communists. Here they took a little bit more of an isolationist angle, although for kind of different reasons. So America was being bled in Vietnam because the communist-led government in the U.S. is working alongside the Soviet Union to bleed American forces and sow disarray in the country. And that, they're not actually fighting communism there. It's all some sort of elaborate conspiracy. Kind of like how Stalin started World War II
right.
to conquer the rest of the world. And kind
right.
of, made America
it fits
take
into
part
the
in things.
John Birch theoretical apparatus pretty nicely.
Yeah, so communist puppets were, at work there. So, they were able to get some support among anti-war elements of the kind of more isolationist elements in the U.S. that were against the war. And also, of course, our friend Depew did not look good for them either, right? Because, there's all this talk about, this is a domestic fascist organization. They have a lot of support.
Yeah,
and,
so Robert Depew, of course, the leader of the Minutemen. Yeah.
Yes. We did an episode about them. Robert Depew's Minutemen, also, of course, complete lunatics and happened to be armed. So that then, fueled this image of them being having a militant wing, like all fascist organizations, even though, of course, we know and that Depew and the Minutemen weren't officially affiliated with the John Birch Society. I mean, Depew was a member for a certain amount of time, but, it couldn't be said that they were a wing of the John Birch Society.
Sure.
But nevertheless, it didn't look good because they're fucking complete lunatics and Nazis. So, of course, there are a lot of things working against them. They finally have people actually against them. I mean, he goes into this whole thing with this conspiracy that, the rich industrialist white man has the entire system against him. And he does end up getting parts of the system against him.
He must be thrilled.
Yeah, but of course still has a huge base of support. Now, there start to be some conflicts within the organization as well. We know that Revilo leaves. It's Revilo or Revilo? I don't fucking know.
Revilo Palindrome Oliver. That's his name.
Yeah, fucking great name. It's awesome. He sounds like a fucking villain.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And we didn't mention this before, but I was listening to his speeches. He sounds exactly like Reverend Lovejoy from The Simpsons. It's fantastic. It's just like,
we may be sure that world government will shoot its dog after the dog has served his purpose.
If the passengers will look to the right, you will see a sad man.
No, it's got that flat southern shit going on,
monotone ass voice. And we mentioned at the beginning of the episode that the cast of characters that had at some point gone through the John Birch Society is huge, right? And their inability to maybe retain membership has to do kind of with their organizational structure, I think. I mean, maybe this is me speculating a little bit more about this because, the founder's word did end up being it. I mean, he was he ran the organization, right? And so any kind of conflicts that came out with him and somebody else, he could get rid of them, kick them out. Revilo was being crazy and becoming increasingly like more openly racist and Nazi. Although, I guess he didn't have problems with the segregationists and stuff, but he was like, becoming a straight up Nazi. And his career, we'll talk about him, I think later when we talk about Yaki, because he also factors in there. And because he goes out and becomes, an overt Nazi and the like. I think that, Welch was constantly trying to balance between being like a mainstream advocacy group, right? Trying to get like his message out as much as possible. And then also being a lunatic and being surrounded by other lunatics. Because, once your organization is based on the idea that the entire US government and everything is infiltrated by communists on the highest level, everywhere, you attract a lot of fucking crazy people. And thus, it's probably pretty hard to retain members. Probably a lot of heads butting there. Although he would say, our organization is a diverse one, and since we are, of course, good Americans and individualists, we respect individual opinions, and we may not agree on everything, but we know the threat of communism. It seems that in practice, this doesn't really seem to be true, and that there were a lot of.
They should have had a diversity officer.
Yeah, they had a diversity officer. They could have. Okay, well, this is why we need to welcome the Nazis in this part and the segregationists, and now we can work together with the congressmen and reach across the aisle. Republicans and Democrats can get together and
sensitivity training to how to work with like tax evaders and.
Conflict resolution.
Now, they don't like being called Nazis. That's a slur to them.
Yes. But of course, the John Birch Society still exists, right? So they didn't, disappear. They just had a high point and then continued to ride it out. So, they existed in the 70s. They were still doing their campaigns. Interestingly, they were also... they also got into some trouble with the press when it came out that they were keeping really meticulous records on people that they thought were communists and people that they thought that they should campaign, like do letter writing campaigns. They were very early in the adoption of like computerized systems for like cataloging people for their letter writing campaigns. So they were kind of on this like cutting edge of stuff, technology and the like, even back then. But of course, the idea that this liberty-loving anti-communist group that, really hates, say the secret police and police states that they keep on talking about, the Soviet police state and the looming police state and police state controls, has like a massive intelligence wing, basically. Right? That's like names and addresses of, suspected fifth columnists and traitors all over America and the like. They were, I think, in their eyes, picking up where McCarthy left and doing the good work there. So, what happens to them? Again, 70s started like decline in membership, but they're still around. Welch starts getting pretty old. Remember, he's born in 1899. So, by the 1980s, he's real old. And in 1983, he steps down. Now, what happens next is fucking hilarious, and I'm sure like fueled their conspiracy minds even more.
Okay.
Now, the guy who takes over after Welch in 1983 is actually a U.S. representative in Congress, Larry McDonald. Now, he didn't get to serve very long because are you guys familiar with the KAL 007, Korean Airlines 007?
No.
It was a Korean airliner that was shot down by the Soviets in 1983 when it had, I guess, veered off into Soviet territory, and it was shot down by like Soviet fighter jets. This motherfucker was on that flight.
Oh, shit.
So he literally got killed by the Soviets.
Damn.
And the rest of them, whatever. the Soviet threat in America, was Oswald really, Lee Harvey Oswald really a Soviet agent, or blah, blah, blah. No, this guy who takes over and is the second leader of the John Birch Society straight up gets killed by the Russians in a fucking Korean airliner.
Well, good for him.
And I mean, the KAL disaster is an interesting one. There's a lot of different conspiracy theories about that. People also forget that, the U.S. had shot down civilian airliners as well. And there's kind of this, and there's always a lot of conspiracy theories when something like that happens. And
Yeah. Visit Poland.
Yeah, visit Poland. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I guess their whole government died in that crash, though. But, that wasn't necessarily shot down. But yes, there are like clear shoot downs, and then there's always a million questions about what happened, because nobody ever wants to admit to shooting down a fucking airliner. So yeah, that's Larry McDonald's fate. So Welch steps back into plate in his old age, the same year that he stepped down, and dies 2 years later in 1985. Now, you would expect that a group that believes that there's this all-powerful communist conspiracy controlling everything in the world would have a hard time rationalizing its existence after the fall of the Soviet Union. But much like NATO, they continued to exist.
Right.
And found in the 1990s kind of a little bit like more energy, so to say. They started kind of branching out into some more conspiracy theories. Of course, as we talked about earlier, talk radio, right-wing talk radio was already a thing. A lot of those people were either former Birchers or Bircher inspired, or Bircher admirers. So, I mean, the message was definitely living on. And this is where you start getting into kind of more the globalist stuff, until now, when their preoccupation is, of course, China, and that the communist conspiracy still exists, and it's in China, and China's
they must
doing everything.
Be loving COVID.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, they publish a lot of shit on fucking YouTube.
Yeah,
and they have some hilarious looking characters on there too.
Do they still have a founder principe kind of thing going on? Do you know?
No, not quite. I mean, they do have like their kind of elder respected guys who are, old white guys that sit in front of, sit on sets basically with tomes of old books behind them. And then they, explain to you, the looming Chinese threat and all that. Of course, they did also support Trump. They funded CPAC. I mean, they're still definitely around, and they still have a lot of millionaire backers. Let's not forget the Koch brothers, who are continuing their legacy as well. But yeah, I mean, I went through their YouTube. I watched a bunch of their videos. They have this guy who's like, I guess, one of their cooler guys or something. And he is a neckbeard that wears a bow tie.
Perfect.
And talks about liberty. It's amazing.
But wait, it gets worse.
They have a Latino dude who's, I think, they're kind of token person of color, who talks about like communism in Venezuela and like critical race theory. They're on that train right now.
Yeah.
Along with the rest of them. They, of course, got really into the revolt in Chile in the last couple years. And I think that's a good way to segue into how I want to end this, which is, again, kind of reevaluating their Americanist ideology. So, I saw this video that they had put out about Chile.
Law and order is breaking down all around us as mob rule and rioting reigns in our nation's cities and streets. Today, we'll look at how Marxist revolutionaries intentionally seek to divide the people.
Now, I don't know, maybe some people don't know what was happening there in recent years, but there was a huge countrywide revolt that, started in Santiago officially because of fare hikes on the metro system in Santiago, but was really an expression of the huge inequality in Chile and the fact that Chile was and is the real like petri dish of neoliberalism, right? Everything is privatized there. They had a movement now going on for decades, a huge student movement, because their education system's like fully privatized. I mean, what what Pinochet was able to establish in Chile is, I think, the exact model for what they desire.
Okay.
And it's no coincidence that there was a whole movement of American libertarians to move to Chile that was promoted as this like free market paradise. And there's like a lot of Americans who moved there to live in like pure liberty because blah, blah, blah. During the revolts, in the midst of the revolt, there were blockades everywhere, street protests every day. And this like American libertarian guy shot a protester in Valparaiso.
Right.
Which, get this, he felt endangered because the protesters had, blocked the streets, and their slogan was like, do a dance or whatever for like the protest. And like, everybody who's driving like does a little dance in their car and then they let you through, right?
Terrifying.
Like wave their like honking, it's like a jovial, carnival-esque atmosphere.
Yeah.
He felt very threatened by this.
Sure.
And like unloaded on these protesters.
He didn't know any dances.
Yeah, no, of course not. They don't dance.
What's he gonna do?
If you see this dude too, like you'd see why he doesn't dance. He's like a complete like stereotype of like a liberty loving American libertarian. He had a whole YouTube channel down there promoting Chile. I think he had a company that was actually settling Americans there for that express reason.
Good God.
Now on the John Birch Society like website and YouTube page, they have like all these scare stories about this. And they like interview this lady who lives there, and it's called like Anarchy, the Looming Threat or something. And it's all these
Going
pictures
way
of like John
Birch, like
exactly.
Yeah.
It's it's all these like scary images of rioting, and then like how the communist uprising in Chile is destroying like this bastion of the free market.
So we went to Chile without speaking any Spanish, without knowing anyone, without having jobs, having sold everything that we owned, and having never been there before. And we chose Chile because it had been thriving economically. It had all the fantastic factors of a successful country. And suddenly, last October, the country broke out in massive civil unrest, worse than anything we've seen here in the United States.
And again, it's one of these things, it's like, that is one of the, like, look at this society. It's a vision of prosperity. And like, and it's like, one of the like highest income inequalities in Latin America, which like every Latin American country has like an insane income inequality.
They meant for fact, like, white American business owners.
Or for, white Chileans, who, there's a massive indigenous movement in the South there, so all of this to them is, the blueprint for what's going to happen. This happened this was in 2019, and then, 2020, the events in the United States proved to them that this was part of a global trend, and that this is like, that Chile is now the blueprint for like what's to come in America, and that like, we have to combat the communist insurgency, which again goes back to how they view any kind of mass movement, which is that it doesn't exist unless it's of course the Tea Party, which is grassroots organization. The fact that like, people protest against racial inequality and police brutality is like completely alien to them, when there's like actual government and state repression and systematic oppression of people. Like that doesn't exist, because they're the ones who are victims here. Like, of course,
sure.
The ruling elite in Chile is they're trying to take them down by manipulating indigenous people who like, who had to deal with
love elites,
who had to deal with shit like colonia dignidad of like literal Nazi pedophiles, like settling in their like ancestral territory.
Yes.
Like, ex-Nazis occupying positions of power, being in a like fascist dictatorship for
all adds up. All adds up.
Yeah. It's all a plot there. So yeah, I mean, if I think about like what their ideology is, and the more like I look at it, the more it seems to be that is their kind of vision of society. I mean, that is really, ideal. And I think that Welch was a Pinochet supporter. but I'm sure that like their vision of America is something very, very similar to that.
Mm-hmm.
And it is. I mean, they say it outright, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems so, yeah. I mean, it's very similar to the Minutemen, I think, in their ideology. I mean, their focus of activities was a bit different, but the ideology seems very close to the Minutemen, I would say.
Oh, absolutely.
And Pinochet seems like what they are aiming for.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's no coincidence that Pinochet's enjoyed a revival in the U.S. far right too, right? The whole like helicopter rides bullshit and this kind of militant anti-communist free market fascism. I mean, there's no other way to put it.
What's going on, Fritz?
I'm just thinking about how interesting it is that like these guys who seem to establish like a fairly tidy link to what we would later call like Trumpism, how their relationship to the intelligence agencies I think is interesting because they had spats with intelligence and as did Trump, and I was just thinking about them as like, I don't know, more in that kind of America First line, I guess, that wasn't so much one of these crazy plots by the FBI, but was kind of just an organic idea of actual American fascists, like self-supporting.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that is, they call it Americanism. American First called it Americanism. That is what it is. It is a domestic variant on some kind of fascism.
Yeah.
Right. That has its own very American characteristics.
Yeah. And always in this ideology, in one way or another, you have some kind of rationalization why, white Protestants are the ruling class.
And also oppressed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Oh, they're doing a birtherism for Kamala Harris now, too.
Oh, fantastic.
It's that she's not eligible to be vice president because both of her parents were not U.S. citizens at the time of her birth. They go into this really long explanation as to why that is.
But she was born in the U.S.
She was born in the U.S., but that doesn't matter.
Okay. All right.
And the problem isn't that that there are immigrants in this country. Like the problem is that you can't be president or vice president, if both of your parents are not native-born American citizens, which is absolutely not true.
Untrue.
But yeah, this is the kind of line they're promoting now. And unfortunately,
what requirement is this unless both of your parents were American citizens? Good God, what world they live in. Absolute fantasy land.
Well, yeah, I mean, they believe that the Illuminati started the Civil War.
Ah, yeah, of course.
That, like, abolitionism was, like, a proto-communist plot.
Yeah, what am I talking about? I'm, like, harping on, like, some legal problem they have. Yes, of course, the whole world is a communist Illuminati plot, yeah. Forgot about all that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of people we're dealing with today, and unfortunately, that's real. And it's in some ways that conspiracy theory bullshit, as we've talked about over and over again on this show in the first arc, and is stronger than it was ever, I think.
Yeah, definitely more normalized. People are definitely used to it.
But through the effort of people like the fucking Birchers, they never went away. They continued to fund media that promoted these ideas. And that's what I'm saying. In some ways, their conspiracy was one of the most effective groups we've talked about so far, definitely in the United States. Because they've really been able to push this shit into the mainstream in a way that would have been unimaginable when they started.
Yeah.
Well, that's the American dream, I mean, if you can be anything you want in America, as long as you have, like, you start with a group of 11 millionaires, the world's your oyster.
Yeah. Oh, the things
and you also don't have slave mentality and such things.
Of course. Yeah.
You're an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm. It's just America.
Yeah. They really go into, like, I love when they talk about parasitism and stuff, like people that don't want to work. And it's like,
yes, of course.
These people are all generationally wealthy. What the fuck are you talking about? Yeah, they really, pulled themselves up. That video is hilarious too, because he's like, I discovered I was and then he chuckles, laissez-faire capitalist, and then everybody laughs. He's like, now that may sound funny to me or you, and then goes into why, like, that's good. But I guess like saying a French word like that
because it
sounds
was
too
French.
fancy. So because you have to
Jesus. I'm looking for some meaning in this joke. Like,
no, because he's like,
it's French.
I would have thought that that's just a money grubbing capitalist with like a monocle and whatever, and it's like, no, it's people like me and you.
You're right. Yeah,
it's like, yes, they're like, the guys who owned mills and fucking industrialists who started. Yeah, that's a person I can really fucking relate to.
I bet he owns a monocle. He doesn't wear it, but I'm sure he has it.
Yeah. Well, like I said at the beginning, it's really, really hard to narrow down what to talk about in an organization that still exists and existed for decades. I hope that this was at least some sort of good intro into their thought. if we can say that. As usual on Tenepod, slogging through the Blue Book was not easy at times, but we did it anyway, and fuck it.
Fuck it, fuck them, and fuck you.
Yeah. I learned that systemic oppression doesn't exist.
Oh.
And that only rich white people are oppressed.
Oh, I thought it was the other way. Huh. Well, you learn something every day.
That is collectivist thinking there, Fritz. And
Man, I am a bit of a collectivist, aren't I? I should work on that.
Yes, we should.
I mean, like with the Minutemen, we saw with the John Birch Society also this conversion of anti-Semitic paranoia into anti-communist paranoia.
Yes.
While basically it's staying the same in terms of what function it serves for their ideology. So I guess many of them probably were quite conscious anti-Semites, but they figured out it's probably not so wise to be open about that.
I mean, some of them were, like I said, they published a lot of people in American Opinion. Mm-hmm. And, and Revilo would later become an outright anti-Semite. But they did also publish a number of anti-Semitic texts, to the point that, one of the first major groups in the U.S. to raise concern about the John Birch Society was the National Rabbinical Council.
Okay.
Who had sent some memos to the U.S. government being like, hey, these guys are fascists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they were really one of the earliest like major groups to voice their concerns about the John Birch Society, because again, there's so much stuff that we couldn't really like fit into this episode, because there's a lot of them and a lot of fucking crazies.
And sadly probably a lot more to come.
Oh, absolutely.
They got some momentum still.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we'll mention them at least a few more times in this arc, because some of the people we'll discuss had some connections with them or started out as John Birch Society members and then moved on to other things.
Yeah, absolutely. This isn't the last we've seen of them.
No.
And maybe even in the next arc. We'll see.
Yeah. That would be interesting. Yes.
Yeah. This is a small Balkan connection here that we didn't really have time to get into. Mm-hmm. We'll just keep you waiting on that.
Yeah, that's our sinister dialectic here on the show. American Nazis, Balkan Nazis, American Nazis, back to Balkan Nazis. Yeah. That's how we do it.
Indeed. All right, well, Team Red, Team Blue, Team...
Yeah, well, I got to go rejoin the War on Christmas, guys.
Yeah.
I got to assassinate Santa, so I gotta take off. Since we ended the last John Birch episode with Bob Dylan's John Birch song, I figure we should end this one with Pete Seeger's.
Okay.
Have a nice round view.
Hey.
Yeah. The good right. Dylan. All right.
I'm not a fan, but okay.
Of Pete? You're not a fan of Pete?
No, but Pete, yeah, not fucking Bob Dylan.
No, that's what I'm saying. Pete Seeger's the good Bob Dylan. He's
got it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. The one that didn't go weird and Christian later. Alrighty, guys. So let's hand it over to Pete, and we'll see you later.
All right.
This song really should be prefaced with the observation of a newspaper editor I met once. He said the John Birch Society really should be called the Jack Ash Society. A bunch of jackashites from Bellamont, Mass. have suffered a terrible fright. They looked under their beds and discovered such reds as Allen and Milton and Dwight. If more you would know of this jackass credo, read the blue book, the black book, the white. If you do, you will find we're all Reds of some kind, like Allen and Milton and Dwight. Joe McCarthy is dead, so Jack Ash instead leads the anti-communist fight. U.S. Reds he has found swarming all around, some 179 million so far, including Allen and Milton and Dwight. If you believe in more hospitals, housings and schools, new highways and civil rights, the Ashites will add you to the un-American list, along with Allen and Milton and Dwight. Social Security's a Bolshevik plot, cooked up by some shrewd Muscovite. So go naked you must, or be a security risk, like Allen and Milton and Dwight. Beware of good pay and the minimum wage, it's part of the socialist blight, created by conspirators bold, like Allen and Milton and Dwight. Unemployment insurance is another red trick that slipped by in the dark of the night. So send back your checks lest you share their fate of Allen and Milton and Dwight. These jackasses are drawing the lunatic fringe, assembling on the right. Barry's their man, he has no pinkish tan like Allen and Milton and Dwight. There's a man sitting on the Un-American Committee, he's a jackass societyite. I wonder what day he will send out a subpoena to Allen and Milton and Dwight. The jackasses say that in World War II we should have joined with the Third Reich. Adolf can pass their loyalty test, but not Allen nor Milton nor Dwight. They want to prepare for a nuclear war, kill everything human in sight. If you'd rather live, you're a communist dupe, like Allen and Milton and Dwight. So all the jackasses should take some advice, wake up and start seeing the light. Their Führer may find they are red agents too, like Allen and Milton and Dwight. Now some good songs and a few bad ones have a moral. Here's the moral of this one. Now a candy bar's sweet, milk chocolate's a treat, but ponder before you bite. The worms hiding inside may shrivel your hide, like Allen and Milton and Dwight.